So, this is an intro to linguistic fieldwork. And what is linguistic fieldwork? Linguistic fieldwork is when a linguist gets together with one or more speakers to get linguistic data from that speaker about the language that the linguist is studying. And that is part of the field of language documentation, which is also called field linguistics or documentary linguistics. So, getting data about the language in order to document it, write it down, just generally have a permanent record of it. And there are actually multiple ways you can do linguistic fieldwork. One of them is to do an elicitation session, which is when the linguist asks the informant to translate sentences into the language being studied, or asks the speaker to judge whether a given sentence or phrase or word that the linguist has come up with is grammatical. And I mentioned translation, but you can also do fieldwork even when the linguist and informant don't have a language in common. So that's not what we're going to do now, because Emma and I do have a language in common. But there is a very interesting video on YouTube with a linguist named Daniel Everett, where he does try to elicit data, sentences, words, phrases from a speaker, while only using the speaker's language, and that is something you can look up later. I guess I can post these to the Slack if anyone is interested later. And one important thing to note is that the word grammatical is used by linguists in a slightly different way than what most people think the word grammatical means. It doesn't mean what you think it means. So, grammatical. Usually, if you read like a newspaper article or some literature book, it'll say that they'll call things ungrammatical. Basically, if they don't fit the rules of the formal written standard, right? But in linguistics, grammatical just means that it's what a speaker considers natural or correct in their own variety. And that variety doesn't necessarily have to be formal, doesn't have to be standard. So, for example, if someone says something like "I didn't see nothing," um, most people probably say that's ungrammatical, quote unquote. But actually, there are if that kind of structure, "I didn't see nothing" or "I seen it," is part of the variety of that person, then it is grammatical. It is grammatical in that variety. It might not be grammatical in formal standard English, but it is grammatical in that particular variety.
And I mean,
so
even if you think that it's not proper English, you can still understand it.
Yeah.
You know what they mean. Whereas if you say anything, see, I didn't.
Yeah.
Everyone, there's no variety of English that I know of where that's grammatical, because the word order is just completely different.
Yeah, exactly. So grammaticality is very contextual. So it depends on the variety, the register, formal, informal. So when you say something is grammatical, well, you kind of have to be careful and specify like grammatical in which variety. So yeah, I didn't see nothing. Well, that's ungrammatical in standard English. That's not part of standard English, formal standard English. But there are lots of varieties where that kind of structure is grammatical because it's what speakers consider natural. And okay, now when people do linguistic fieldwork, the thing about languages is that they're extremely complex. And so if you want to write a grammar of an entire language covering all of the aspects of a language, that is going to take years. You could spend a lifetime doing that. So a lot of the time, what linguists do is they will go and do elicitation sessions focusing on one very specific aspect of the language. So they can go in depth on that one aspect. And so one of them is phonetics. So they might record the speaker and then analyze it later to see exactly what physical sounds they made. And another one is phonology. And phonology is different from phonetics because it deals with categories of vowels called phonemes. Sorry, categories of sounds called phonemes. Yeah. So the thing about sounds in languages is that a lot of the time speakers will consider different physical sounds to be the same. So, like for example, if you in North American English, you might have the word butter. You can pronounce it butter, or you can pronounce it butter. And a speaker of English is gonna, even though those are both different pronunciations of the T phoneme, t and r, a speaker of English is gonna lump both of those into the same category T. So they're part of the same phoneme, um, even though they're different sounds. And so a phonologist, if someone is doing phonology work on a language, they will do they will go get data to figure out to record what the speaker is saying, and then they'll transcribe it phonetically. But then, in addition to recording, exactly what sounds they said, a phonologist, someone working on the phonology, is going to try to figure out which sounds the speakers consider to be different and which sounds do they consider to be the same. So, like, a linguist might, if a linguist is doing fieldwork on English and the speaker says, one time the speaker says butter and the other time the speaker says butter, well, the phonologist will use that to try to conclude that those two sounds are part of the same phoneme. Then you've also got syntax. That's another aspect. So like you can say the big apple, but you can't say apple big the. You have morphology, which is the study of morphemes. Morphemes are parts of words. So like you have CrossingsCon. You have cross, you have ing, you have the s plural, and then you have the con. CrossingsCon, 4 morphemes. So a morpheme is basically a linguistic unit that means something. It doesn't necessarily have to be able to stand on its own. Like, cross is a word, it stands on its own. The S at the end of crossings doesn't really, you can't say s is not a word. So that's morphology, trying to figure out what the morphemes are. Are there any prefixes, any suffixes? Then you've got morphosyntax. Oh, good question. Okay. Is a morpheme different from a syllable, or do the two overlap? So a morpheme can be as long as you want. It can be a syllable, or it can be multiple syllables. So I'm trying to think of an example. Butter.
Cranberry.
Butter. Butter is 2 syllables, but it's a single morpheme. You can't break butter down into butter is not something that butts, like headbutting or whatever. It's a single word. It's a single morpheme, and you can't break it down any further. So a morpheme can have multiple syllables. Can one syllable can have multiple syllables. It can even be less than a syllable. It might not even have a vowel in it. It's just like the plural in crossings. That's at the end is a morpheme, and it has no vowel. It's not even a syllable. So it can be less than a syllable, multiple syllables. So yeah, good question. And Then you have morphosyntax, which is when, I guess you could say, when the meaning of a word or the form of a word affects the word order. So, like, a lot of languages have gender. The European languages, a lot of time they have masculine and feminine, maybe also neuter, and that can affect the form of other words in the sentence. And I put in the phrase noun class because noun classes in European languages, nouns are generally divided into categories based on gender. But in other languages, there are languages where they're not based on gender. They're based on just a variety of semantic things. It could be like animacy. So you might have a class for animate beings and inanimate objects. And so if you look that up, a lot of papers and articles and whatnot will describe that as being gender. So it's standard in the field to call that gender. But I tend to prefer using the term noun class for languages where the noun categories aren't actually based on gender. So I would call it like the animate noun class and the inanimate noun class because, for me, I find that the animate gender and the inanimate gender, or, maybe you have a noun category for like tools and vehicles. You you might have a language that has like one category is for tools, another category is for vehicles, and in linguistic analysis and papers, you might call that gender 3 and gender 4. You have the tool gender and the vehicle gender. And I find that kind of odd. So I would just tend to call those noun classes because I think that makes more sense. Then you have case. Case has to do with different parts of the sentence. So like the subject, the object. They can also be equivalent to like prepositions. So like for example, in English you have things like of the man. So you have the preposition of, the article the, and man, the noun man. Other languages will tend to do that differently. They will, instead of using of and the, they'll just add an ending onto the end of the word. So it'll be an inflection. Another thing is number. So like singular, plural. Some languages have a dual number. So words that have a form that is only when you're only talking about two things. And then you've also got tense for verbs, past, present, future. And there are a bunch of categories, a bunch of other categories, but those are just a few examples. And now, background information on Afrikaans. So, Afrikaans is a Germanic language spoken mainly in South Africa that is closely related to Dutch. It's one of the 11 official languages of South Africa and is spoken as a first language by 13.5% of the population. And Afrikaans is also spoken as the main language in 10% of households in Namibia. So, Emma, I'm going to hand it over to you. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about Afrikaans. Oh, I think you're muted.
Okay, I clicked it and it didn't work properly. Okay, so like Luca said, Afrikaans is a Germanic language, very similar to Dutch. The easiest, most concise way to say it is that it used to be Dutch, mostly, and you have a bunch of Dutch settlers who came to South Africa and settled there, and over the last couple hundred years, the two languages kind of diverged. So Dutch changed in some ways, and then Afrikaans changed in some ways, and now they're considered different languages. A side note that a lot of things that people consider dialects can also be considered separate languages, and things that are considered separate languages could also be considered dialects. And a lot of it has to do with like politics and power, and who has status to be able to develop things and consider it a separate language versus just a dialect. Notice I said just a dialect, right? There's this kind of idea that's lesser than, which isn't true, but it can be contentious. Afrikaans is one of the most the youngest official languages that have been documented and developed. And what's neat is that there's a lot of written record of like how the language is developed because it's so new, which is kind of neat as well. As it was developing, there was also a lot of kind of pushback from people who wanted to keep Dutch, pure, and people who spoke Afrikaans before it was considered Afrikaans were all the language was sometimes derogatorily considered to be called like kitchen Dutch, or a slang. And then eventually, as the Afrikaner settlers, who were called Boers, grew more of their own identity and amassed more kind of cultural power and group kind of thought, they were able to kind of reclaim that as part of their identity and considered an actual language separate from Dutch. And the last thing that I think is important is that Afrikaans has a strong tie to the colonial history of South Africa. It's pretty intrinsically tied to the concept of apartheid, which is an Afrikaans word meaning apartness, separateness. And during the time that Afrikaners were in power from 1948 to 1994, there was a strong push to have Afrikaans be the national language and the language of the government, the language of instruction. There were massive protests when the government tried to institute a policy that everyone had, all students had to be taught purely in Afrikaans. And that was a strong part of the resistance movement during apartheid. So there's a little bit of a problematic history there. And while 13.5% of the population consider it their first language, a much, much larger percentage speak it in some capacity, because even though apartheid's been over for 28 years, 27 years, I think. There's still the Afrikaner kind of culture still has a lot of institutional power. So it's still a language that you see that has a kind of outsized importance in cross-cultural communication and stuff like that. That being said, I think Afrikaans is a really cool language, and but despite its pretty problematic history, I grew up so I was born in South Africa to a Afrikaner parent and an American parent who learned Afrikaans in her 30s. After my parents got married. So she was kind of a latecomer to it. And then when I was about 2 years old, we moved to the US, and I've grown up here ever since, but my family speaks Afrikaans at home. I've gone back to visit. I studied abroad there for a semester in high school and went to an Afrikaans school. So that's kind of my background with Afrikaans as well. Which is important when we talk about how I do elicitation things, because you will notice, to anyone who's speaks Afrikaans or Dutch or things like that. You'll notice I have a pretty strong American accent when I speak it because that's the culture that I grew up in, and there may be instances where the word that I use or the grammar that I use is slightly different from what most South Africans would use, because again, I'm mostly using it to speak with my parents and my sister, and that's about it. So my vocabulary is odd and slightly different, but yeah, that's all the background I have.
All right, thank you so much, Emma. That was wonderful. Okay, so we are going to learn the grammar and structure of Afrikaans, a small part of it, by getting data, Afrikaans data, and then analyzing it to figure out what the rules are. So we won't be just looking up things in a grammar. We will be making the grammar. We will be making. I was gonna say making up as we go along, but no. But yeah. So anyway, we are going to. I am going to phrases and sentences in English, and I will ask her to translate them into Afrikaans. And finally, there are some other resources you can take a look at if you're interested in linguistic fieldwork. One of them is a autobiography by Daniel Everett, who was a linguist who went to do linguistic fieldwork in the Amazon jungle, like it says here. And to save time, I'm going to, I guess, post this on the Slack if anyone is interested. And for now, I guess we can move on to the elicitations. So I'm just gonna change what I'm sharing. Okay. Sharing screen. Okay. So this is a spreadsheet, and this is how we are going to track the Afrikaans data. Here you have a column with a bunch of English sentences, and I'm going to transcribe Emma's translations in IPA, which is the International Phonetic Alphabet. And I thought we would start off with minimal pairs. Minimal pairs are a really neat concept in linguistics, which is where you take a pair of words or sentences or phrases that only differ in a single element. And the reason you would do that is because if only one element is different in the original, then there's a very good chance that only one element will be different in the translation, and that can allow you to tell what the sounds in the translation mean, because otherwise it's just it's just a string of sounds, and you can't necessarily divide them up into words, because when you speak, you don't have spaces between words when you speak. I mean, you could ask the informant, what do these sounds mean? Can you split these sounds up into words? But if you don't have access to speaker, like if you've already finished doing the elicitations and you're like at spreadsheet in front of you and you don't have anyone to ask, well, then you would have to, in order to split up the sounds into words or into morphemes, you would have to do that by yourself without being able to ask for advice as to how to do that. So one way of making sure that you can do that easily is to use minimal pairs. So, Emma, hold on, let me get my IPA keyboard. Okay, so how do you say a man?
A man.
Okay, so a man. How do you say the man?
Die man.
So you can see in the English, man is the same, and the articles are different. In the Afrikaans, you can see man is the same, and the sounds immediately before it different. So that that means it's a pretty good. It's most likely that means and d means the. So a woman. How do you say a woman?
A fro.
Oh. How about the woman?
Die fro.
Oh. How about a building?
A gebouw. Is there a vowel between the ch and the b? Ja.
Okay,
Oh.
so is that schwa?
Ja.
Okay.
Gebouw.
So
Gebouw.
okay. So here in this transcription, this that first symbol right there is called a schwa, and it represents the sound. That's it's a Greek letter, I think. I don't remember what it's called, but that X-looking letter represents, I believe, of a uvular fricative. So it's pronounced. It's a voiceless uvular fricative.
Ge.
Yeah. So it's pronounced with, I guess, a stream of air coming out of your mouth and coming in contact with the uvula, which causes some friction, and so you get the sound ch. Okay. So how about the building?
Die gebouw.
Oh. How about a dog?
A hond.
Did you say that again?
I know. I think I know what you're listening for. A hond.
Hund. Okay. I heard some nasalization the first time.
Okay. A hond.
Okay. A hund. Okay. So from these minimal pairs that we've done, we can see a pattern. If you have an indefinite article, in Afrikaans you have a. If you have a definite article, in Afrikaans you have die. At least for these nouns. In a lot of languages, the articles are different depending on which gender or noun class the noun is. So we could try to use this rule to predict what the form of this is going to be. The dog. So, Emma, is the dog die Hund?
Yes.
Okay. That was a grammaticality judgment. Based on the data we got so far, I observed a pattern, and then based on that pattern, I came up with a hypothesis as to what that particular structure is, and I came up with a form to test that structure. And I asked Emma if it was grammatical or not, and it was. So, okay. So these are some sentences that I wrote down in order to figure out if adjectives change depending on gender, and also see what the order of adjectives are. So, like for example, you can say the big black dog, but you can't say the black big dog. I don't think that sounds kind of weird. And you definitely can't say dog the black big. So, we are going to move on to adjectives. So, Emma, how do you say the tall man?
Die lang man.
Die long man?
Die lang man.
Ah, okay. That
Die lang vrouw.
sorry.
Autofill is always so annoying.
Oh, okay. And okay, and the tall building.
Die lang gebouw.
Lang gebouw. Okay. So, how about the library?
Die bibliotheek.
Okay, could you say that again?
Die bibliotheek.
Hmm.
I can say it
Like this?
faster too.
Oh, wait, no, sorry. That's Sampa.
My IPA is not good.
Okay, so die Bibliothek.
I think I might be saying it fast.
So
Slow it down. Die bibliotheek. That's
okay,
probably a
bibliothek.
purer pronunciation.
So four syllables.
Bibliotheek. I don't know. If I say it fast, it's more of an sound. If I say it slower, it's more of an like O sound.
Mm.
Nice
Okay, so we can put that in speaker notes here.
Yeah.
So spoken slowly, it sounds like
Bibliotheek.
okay. So when spoken quickly, it sounds like bibliothek, and when spoken slowly, it sounds like bibliothek.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'd say the second, the slower or clearer one sounds better to me when you say it. So that's more accurate, I think.
Okay. Okay. So how about the small library?
Die kleine bibliotheek.
Okay. Could you say that again?
Die kleine bibliotheek.
Okay. Klein bibliothek.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. How about the big library?
Die grote bibliotheek.
Fruit.
Groot.
Could you say that again?
Groot.
Oh, okay. Fruit.
Groot.
Okay, so no F. Goed.
Yeah, no, groot.
Goed.
Yep.
That's. Oh, is it spelled Groot?
Yeah.
Aha. Okay. So it's like great. It's a cognitive great. Okay. Funny how sound changes work. Okay, how about the big black dog?
Die groot zwart hond.
Zwart hond. Die groot zwart hond.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Zwart hond.
One part of my accent that I know is different from almost every single South African is I don't roll my R's or roticize my R's.
Okay.
And that goes for other words. I think I said that earlier in a word, but that's just a thing that my mouth does not do that most other people do. So in most cases, it would be a rolled R or a tapped R.
Use a rolled R or a tapped.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. So, yes, so this is kind of interesting because, like I was talking about earlier about how there are phonemes, there are different sounds, and there are sounds that are physically different, but people perceive them as being the same. So you have you have the rolled r, you have the tapped r, and those are all very different sounds. But European speakers, at least, will tend to perceive all of those as being R's, as all being rhotic sounds.
Mhm.
So that is that is that is an interesting example. I don't. That's more. That's more an example of. I don't know what the term for it is, but it's not exactly the same as phonemes because phonemes refer to variation within a variety, whereas this is referring to differences in pronunciation between different varieties.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So like if someone is speaking, if someone from France is speaking English, they might say instead of they might say like goed instead of wait no it's a root. Okay, road, road instead of road. So those are very different sounds, but an English speaker is going to be used to um, that sound being a kind of R. So even though they're different sounds, yeah, they're considered to be the same in a lot of European languages. Not because you have this necessarily have the same variety or the same language that has multiple different pronunciations, but because of, I guess, familiarity with the sound systems of other languages. English speakers are used to hearing French speakers pronounce English with a h sound, so they are that kind of trains them to perceive it as an R, I guess. So yeah, that is interesting. Maybe there's a word for that term. Oh,
And part of why I decided to comment is when I heard you speaking it back, I was like, okay, that sounds like it's correct, but it sounds like my Afrikaans, not like the Afrikaans that I hear other people speak.
mhm. Well, when you're doing fieldwork on the idiolect
Yep.
of a specific real individual,
Uh,
not an abstract ideal up in the clouds, in the platonic universe of ideas. It's actual speech that's spoken by real people. And
yeah. Yep.
I was going somewhere with that. There was something I wanted to say, but I don't know. Yeah. Oh, yeah, idiolect. So, idiolect. That is a neat concept. So, you've heard of languages, you've heard of dialects, which is a variety of a language that can differ depending on geography. For example, you know, a dialect is a variety of a language spoken in a particular area, or maybe by a particular social class or race or whatever. Um, and an idiolect is the variety spoken by a particular individual. Every single person has their own idiolect, which is unique to them and which has its own specific rules. It has its own specific grammar, its own specific vocabulary, and no two idiolects are exactly the same. So if you get two people together, even if they grew up in the same place, they might have slightly different judgments as to what is grammatical and what is not grammatical. So that is a very neat concept, and this is something that I've actually come across when reading linguistics papers. Like the linguists will be saying, "Oh well, I was doing fieldwork and I asked some native speakers, is this sentence correct?" And some of them said yes, and some of them said no. Some of them said, kind of. So it depends. Depends. Everyone is different, and so
Not to rush you, Luca, but I think there's gonna be another panel in here in a little bit. They can move to another room, but if other people want to attend Anush and Masha's talk as well, we should probably try to move a little bit faster.
sure.
I could do this all day, but
Okay. So how about an online encyclopedia?
Okay, I'm blanking on the word online. Let me see. Okay, it is what I thought it was. Online woordenboek. Or wait, no, that's dictionary. Never mind. Sorry. The other thing is that my
Well, we can just skip to the next section.
yeah, let's do a different word.
Okay, so I here I have some sentences that I made up to see if Afrikaans has cases. So how do you say the book was big?
Die boek was groot.
The book was fruit.
Was groot.
Oh, yeah, right. Sorry. Okay.
You could also say, dit was een groot boek.
Okay. Okay.
Don't worry. Don't you don't have to worry about it.
Could you repeat that again?
Dit was een groot boek. Okay, it was a big book.
Okay. Have you? What is the first consonant of the second word?
Was.
Was. Is that a V or is it a slightly different sound?
It's like a V sound. Was.
Okay. How about I read the book?
Ik heb die boek gelezen. Ik heb die boek gelezen.
Ik heb die boek gelezen.
Ik heb die boek gelezen.
Okay. Ik heb die boek gelezen. Okay. Is that the correct, is that how you split it up into words?
Yeah.
Okay. How about I put my phone on the book?
Ik heb mijn phone op die boek gezet.
Can you say that again?
Ik heb mijn phone op die boek gezet.
Okay, one more time.
Op die... Nope. Ik heb mijn phone op die boek gezet.
So, ik heb mijn phone op die boek gezet.
Yeah.
Okay. The book's cover is gorgeous. Or how about the text of the book or the contents of the book?
If you do contents, die inhoud van die boek is prachtig.
you say that again?
You're specifically looking for case stuff. There's kind of like there's a couple ways you can say it. But you're looking for the book's cover is or the book's content is gorgeous, not the content of the book is gorgeous.
Well, this was the initial sentence, but it could also just be like a phrase, not a sentence. So just like the content of the book, not necessarily gorgeous. The word gorgeous in it.
Okay. So you can say die boekse inhoud was prachtig. Or if you just want the content of the book, die boekse inhoud.
Okay. So, yeah. Okay. So, looks like we're probably gonna have to end soon. So I am just going to I'm just gonna say that we have, based on these based on this data, we have managed to figure out a number of patterns and a number of structures in Afrikaans. And I am going to open up a Word document that I wrote. Where is it? Yeah. So I'm going to. I'm gonna have to change the way I'm sharing my screen. Sharing entire screen. Sure. Okay. So I've here are a number of research questions that I came up with for Afrikaans to try to figure out. Divided into subcategories, so like syntax, which means word order, morphosyntax, phonology, and so we have been able to answer a few of them. So in English, you have article, adjective, noun structures and noun phrases. So like the black dog. Article, adjective, noun. Afrikaans, it's also article, adjective, noun. Here. Goed, bibliotheek. So that's one research question solved. Might get us a grant eventually, perhaps. $10,000 grant to do fieldwork on Afrikaans. Who knows? Okay, so yeah. In English, you have the adjective comes before the noun, big dog. In Afrikaans, it's also before the noun. Groot bibliotheek. Order of adjectives and noun phrases. Okay, so the big black dog. In Afrikaans, you have die groot swart hond. So the order is the same as in English, and specifically, the order is article. The order of the adjectives is size and then color. So color comes after size. So it's a big black dog and not the black big dog. Then, in terms of cases, that is very interesting. In English, articles do not inflect for case or gender. Here we have some articles, and it doesn't seem like there are any gender distinctions. It's and d all the time, just like in English. So no gender inflection. Are there any case endings? Are there any case inflections? Well, no, because at least not in this data. You could do more fieldwork and try to get more data, but based on the data we have so far, there are no case inflections. It's D. At least for the different article. The different article is D, no matter what case it is. So like in the book was big, the is part of the subject, the book. And I read the book, the is part of the object. So you're doing something to the book. Sort of. Reading is, you're not really doing something to it, but like, that's kind of how it functions in a sense. So it's the accusative, the book, and that is also D. There's no, doesn't change depending on whether it's an accusative. You have the dative, which is like when you give something to someone or use a preposition in a lot of languages. And in that case, well, that is interesting because here we have Ek het me van Ek het me van op die boek gezet. Okay, so in that case, it looks like we have a preposition. So op looks to be the equivalent of on. So that looks to be a preposition and not a different form of the word die. Although it can be kind of tricky to figure out what is and what isn't a word. So I don't think there's a universally agreed upon definition of what a word is. So I'm 99% sure that it's spelled as two words in Afrikaans, and it's oh, thanks for the reminder. And yeah, so I'm going to guess that that op is a preposition, not a form of the word die. So there's no dative case either for die, for the article, and the books. But yeah. Yeah, so it's D for the genitive too. Die boeksinhoud. Boeksinhoud. So it's D in every single case, so based on that we can conclude that most likely, based on what we've seen so far, D doesn't vary, doesn't have any differences in terms of case. Do nouns and adjectives inflect for case? Well, in these examples that we have here, word book does not seem to inflect for case most of the time. Nominative, accusative, and dative, it's the same form, book, but in the genitive, you have the form books, just like in English. So it looks like Afrikaans does have a genitive case ending S for nouns. And yeah, is there anything else here?
I think that's good. And we can, if people have questions, you can message us, or we can hang around a little bit in the lobby if you want to hear more.
Yeah, cool. So that was the unconvention. Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Emma, so much for helping us learn more about Afrikaans. This is really cool.
Yeah, it was very fun. And I have some other stuff, like I did a couple linguistics projects on Afrikaans when I was in school, so I can send those to you, Luca, and if other people have questions as well.
Absolutely, that sounds really cool.
Mm-hmm.
So then I guess now
yeah. Does anyone have questions or comments or anything you want to say? Do you want to say that in Dutch? 6?
Dit was een goede presentatie.
Okay.
And I would say dit was een goede presentatie. Dit was een goede presentatie.
Can get over the sound changes.
Mhm.
That is
Can
so
you say
different
yours
from the
again,
word
Six?
great.
Can you say yours again?
Dit was een goede presentatie.
Dit was een goede presentatie. So see, they're definitely mutually intelligible. Like, I can absolutely understand what you're saying. But most of the sounds are technically actually a little bit different.
Yeah, like I said earlier to you, to me, especially when I read Afrikaans and also when I hear it sometimes, it sounds like somebody speaking who has a form of dyslexia because of you. It's very phonetic.
Yeah, it's very phonetic. It's super easy to learn like spelling because almost everything is written the way it sounds.